Hi everybody, I'm Denise Schober and this is a Tin Lizzie hosted webinar. And today we're going to talk about freehand feathers. And the goal is that you too could make your own freehand feathers if you don't already, or have some ideas of the thought process of making feathers after this webinar. And there are many styles of feathers. You can have feathers that are very traditional, very clean, very elegant. You can have feathers that are very free-flowing, and that's just the style that they are. A good example of that for a artistic style feather is Dusty Farrell. He does beautiful feathers, but they're very artistic. Where on the other hand, if you look at Sue Nichols' feathers, hers are very elegant. They're very uniform. They tend to be the same or gradiate in size as you go through her patterns and her style. So a couple things we're going to talk about is how you could have the opportunity to make feathers, or make better feathers if you're not making them at all, to make feathers. So there's going to be a lot that we're going to go over in the next hour. So you can have feathers that are rows, edges, edge to edge, borders, border to borders. So let's talk about the elements of a feather. You have a spine. Some feathers have spines, some don't. There's no right or wrong way to do a feather. You are going to find the style of your feather. When I say there's no right or wrong way to do a feather, that means that if you don't want a spine in your feather, it's okay. If you want to backtrack your feather and sew over top of stitching that you previously did, that's okay too. If you want to cross a line to do a feather, it's okay. So the elements of a feather, as you see here, you have a spine. That's the center line. That spine could be straight, could be a curve, could be a shape, or it could be spineless as the top one is. A feather has a distinctive shape. Now when I look at a feather, I see hearts. Some people see paisleys. What do you see when you look at a feather? What shape do you see? Because I see hearts, and that's how I think of it when I make feather designs. If you see a paisley, it's perfect. There's nothing wrong with seeing a paisley. Making feathers, you can be creative. You need to practice. So the row at the bottom is a curvy feather. I'm going to do some of those in a little bit. I tend to like to do the more artistic feathers as opposed to the very uniform feathers. As I said, either way is okay. You can also do feathers in shape. So I talked about that a moment ago. The spine could be a shape. Well, here, there's really no spine in this heart. This heart is all feathers. It's consistent of all feathers. What spine you might see is actually the feather coming to a point in that center section. But you could start the heart base with a shape. And then you can add the feathers to that. You can take the feather inside. You can take the feather outside the shape. So you can go in and out of the shape. Or you might say, well, I just want to do a feather on the outside of that shape. And that would be okay too. There would be nothing wrong with that. Here's another shape, a wreath. So maybe you want to do feathers in a wreath. Or maybe you want to do feathers in that heart shape. The one at the top is one of Dusty Farrell's. So you can see it's very artistic. It's very free form, and there are no rules. There are fun feathers. So fun feathers might be real whimsical, could be feathers and flames, and you can use feathers as fillers. So you have a lot of choices when it comes to the feathers. So we're going to go out to the video camera, and in front of you I'm going to draw some feathers. So I think it's important for you to see the thought process of making feathers, of how I think about feathers, might not be the same way as you think about feathers. And what I mean by that is that maybe when you think about feathers, you think about what the spaces you have. Maybe you think about being very uniform. Maybe you think differently than me, and there is nothing wrong with that. I'm here to tell you there's nothing at all wrong with being different. You do not have to think the same way that I do. What you want to do is take from this what works best for you. So while the camera's focusing, there we go, I'm going to show you how I practice my feathers. Now I do it in a sketchbook. Here I'm in front of the camera, and what I'm really doing is going to really draw feathers in front of you. So I have a marker. And the first thing I'm going to do is draw the spine. And my apologies for the camera not wanting to focus. Let me see if I can fix this. I think this will be better. So there's my spine. Again, a spine can be curved. A spine could be a straight line. A spine can be a shape. So the first thing I do is I draw my spine. And a feather can be a continuous line. And that continuous line is very important on the quilting frame because we want to get from one point to the next. So the first time I do this, I'm going to draw the spine, and then I'm going to come in and add the feathers. It might not be the way that I sew it at the sewing machine, okay? So what I mean by that is I'm going to come down to the bottom here, and I'm going to draw my heart shape. And I can keep them the same size or change the size as I go. So I see a heart, which means that there's going to be a heart on the other side of this feather. So I'm going to come the same way from the bottom to the top. And draw that heart again. Now I emphasize what I call as the cleavage of the heart, this section right here. You may say, well, I don't really like that style, and that's okay. You can do it a little different. So I'm going to do it again in a red marker right over what I did to show you that if you don't want to emphasize that, how you can do this. I like a little curve. You might not. There's nothing wrong with either way. On the straight line one, again, if you think of this as a heart, you'll begin to see your feathers. So a heart, a heart, a heart, and it can be full. These are a little flat. So if you want it fuller, that's a feather. And you're going to find that you go one direction better than the other. So when I go to draw it how I would sew it, you're going to say, I do better going this direction than I do better going this direction. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with you going one direction better than another direction. That's just the way our brain works. Right brain, left brain. You're going to find that, you know what, I can't do it this way as well as the other. But if you practice, 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 you're going to find that you're going to get better that second direction. So I'm now going to move the marker on this whiteboard the same exact way that I would sew it. So the first thing is that I'm going to sew the spine. I tend to like to sew my spine first. So here's my spine. I pause. Let the camera focus. I pause and come back down and come back down and back down. And then back up. Notice that my pen did not leave the board. Do the feathers have to match the other side? No. Those feathers do not line up with the feathers on the other side, and it's still a feather. Remember, I have no rules in my sewing room, so I tend not to have a rule that's going to make me fail, okay? And I don't want to set anybody up to fail either, meaning that you're going to find the best way to make your feathers. You're going to find what works well with you. Now, I took the project from the Quilt Magician, and I actually set it up here on my frame so that I can stitch it in front of you. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm actually going to stitch some feathers in front of you so that you can see my thought process. Now, I did bring some stencils in because there are great stencils out there, and they're great aids to help us to be better at what we're doing. And this is one of my favorite feather stencils. So I might take this feather stencil, even though it's smaller than this triangle, I'm going to place it in that triangle space. I'm going to pounce it, and then I'm going to stitch it. And I'm going to fill in the rest of the space with echoes of the previous feathers. So how you do this is, let me bring the machine over out of our way. The very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up exactly where I need it to be. So I need it to be right there. The next thing that I do is I get my tape out. So I have painter's tape here. I do like the embroidery tape by Floriani. It's pink. It really keeps things straight, and it's reusable. The painter's tape does not always hold as well as I'd like. And it might be because I'm in Michigan with a little bit of humidity and moisture in the air. So I secure this down where I want it. See, the tape's already trying to come up. And I have my pounce. So I take my pounce and I tap it. So I just tap it on something. That brings the chalk inside of here to the bottom of the kind of like an eraser. And then I take this and I swipe this down on what it is that I'm going to do. I don't pounce it like the name says. I swipe it and do a swipe right over the top. Then I remove my stencil, and there's my feather. Now, once I have that feather down, I need to really figure out how I'm going to stitch this. So I actually come over here with my machine, and I need to follow and figure out what direction I want to do this. How do I want to start? How do I want to go? How do I want to end? So when we go back and we look at this stencil, there's a couple different ways that we could go. Okay? There we go. I'm going to just get a little colored pencil here so you can watch my movement. If this is the center, and I'm going to start in the center, I am going to go right to left. So I'm going to start here, come down, go up to the top, go up to the top, come out. And there's nothing wrong with pausing at the point inside the feather. Here, I'm going to cross over. Notice this. From right, I'm going left, and then I'm going right. Instead of stopping here and going up, it's better to cross over the line once in a while when you can. And you know what? I'll be okay. If I cross my line, it will be okay. Then I come back around and do the other side of the feather. all the way around and back up to the center. That's how I'm going to do this feather. So I'm going to get the camera set up so that you can watch me stitch this specific feather. So give me just one moment to move the camera. And the other thing about feathers while I'm doing this is that there are lots and lots and lots of books out there. And I learn and take classes just like all of you do. And I love references. So don't be afraid to maybe go to your local quilt shop, go to your local library, even on the internet, check what resources there are out there for you to research feathers, because there's lots of different ways to do them, different styles, and you're going to find what works best for you. And it's not going to happen overnight. So I have the camera up. I've wound a bobbin. A couple things. I've wound my bobbin. My thread is in the needle. And I also have a new needle in. I'm quilting on green batting made by Quilter's Dream. And so it's a polyester batting with my black that I have on here. I like this batting or black batting so that I don't see the bearding coming through with what I'm doing. And then the other thing is that I also like to make sure that I have a fresh needle in for what I'm doing. So right now I have a 100 needle in and a freshly wound bobbin and another bobbin on my machine. Now I tend to drop my handles when I free motion. And then the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in, and I would actually tell the quilt magician or my robotics, whichever one you have, that I'm going to record this. Now maybe I don't record this one and I record my second one at the other end, but I would record it. So the first thing I'm going to do once I set everything up is I'm actually going to go in and pull my bobbin thread up. So I pull my bobbin thread up, and then I take a piece of the blue painter's tape and I hold the bobbin thread in place while I'm stitching, especially if I'm recording. So I come back here and I want my bobbin to stop down, my needle to stop down, excuse me, and I hold all of that in place. That makes it easy so that I don't have to remember to hold that, because once I get into free motion and I start concentrating, I kind of get in this lull of I'm not paying attention to anything else around me. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. Everything is good. And then the next thing I do, which I won't subject you to this, is I put music on, and I usually dance and sing or whatever with my machine, but I'm just going to free motion this morning. I also want to make sure that my machine stitches are set up to the correct length for what I'm doing, and so that becomes extremely important. So when I quilt something like this, I usually like 12 to 14. I like a small stitch length. Whatever stitch length you like, that's okay. I'm using a 40 weight king tut in the top, and I'm actually using a 40 weight king tut in the bobbin. I have a few bobbins that are what I call orphan bobbins, where they're leftovers, and when I do things like this I tend to use those bobbins up, and then that way I can have them ready to fill empty. So now I'm going to push the start button on my machine. I have it in Lizzie mode. Notice that the needle's not moving until I move. And keep in mind, nobody sees the stencil on here but you and me. So once that stencil's gone, I'm going to be in great shape. So I paused right where my thread was. I'm now going to move this thread over to where I quilted, because when I'm done, I'm going to bury that thread. I'm not going to just leave it or cut it. I'm actually going to bury it with an easy threading hand sewing needle into my quilt. Now that's the way I didn't want to go. I forgot, and that happens. So I just have to make sure that I cross the line. Now notice that I went over the top on that one, so you have a couple choices there. And when I go to the other side, I'll show you the other way you can go. So this side I went around, this side I went up over the top. It really depends on what way you like and what way you want to achieve what you're doing. So this is more of what I did the first time. So there's my feather. Now, I'm going to join this up where that end was, and then I'm going to come back in, and here's where I'm going to fill. So now I'm just going to do some echoing around, and maybe up here I do a little circle, so maybe up there I do a little swirl, something that allows me to have a little bit of free form, and from there I'm going to then move this thread back to the other side. Keep in mind, if you have the Quilt Magician, you want to disengage the Quilt Magician. You want to make sure that it's not engaged, and then that way you have the freedom to move things. So that's a little box underneath your machine, depending on which robotic system you have or which robotic system you have set up. It might be slightly different. Then I'm going to finish, do my little curve, echo around these. Pause with my needle down. So I've completed the first round of echo quilting. Again, I stop. I move these over to here, and I'm going to continue to echo quilt all the way around this feather block up to that outer edge. So there I just made a corner. And the feather can have more than one echo on it. Doesn't have to be exactly the same. And this would be a lot easier for me, and maybe for you also, with my open toe foot on. I did not put my open toe foot on this morning. So, and I'll continue on. And pause. So there's my first feathered triangle. Now looking at this, I have a few other sections that I can do in here. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that bobbin thread up. So I'm sliding the machine out and coming back, do a needle up. The reason I slide the machine away is that makes a long tail. And I like a long tail on my bobbin thread so that I can bury it. So here's my bobbin thread, here's my top thread, and now I can move that out of the way. These tails then, again, will get buried within what I'm doing. So those are all ready. That one's good to go. Now the next triangle I also have that same triangle in a smaller version. It just happens that it fits within this space. So again, I'm going to pounce this one down, or I have this particular one. See, that one's just a little big. So if I was going to do this, I would continue on. Now I would probably go from this feather, since I have it in my head now, over to the other side over here to this feather. So let me pounce one more on here just to show you how that is. There's no need to tap my pounce container again. The pounce is still ready to go, and there's my next feather. Now, I'm going to do the next feather in this section here. So a couple things that I can do. I could go in and draw my feather, or my spine. So I could go in here and say, okay, how am I going to do this? So I just drew a spine. If I wanted it to match what was up here, if that was important, again, I would record it. But for me, it's not important. I like the free form. I like the feel of what I get when I just play with my feathers. And again, this is a great way to make a sampler of your feathers. So let's do this one here. Normally I would do this one back here, but I want to keep my hands out of the way of you seeing what I'm doing. I'm going to shut the light off. Let's see if that looks better with the light off for you, and it does. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is pull up my bobbin thread, make my two long tails, and put my needle down. I'm going to tape those tails of what I just did so that they stay out of my way. And keep in mind, there are also feather borders and feather edge to edge that you could do. So if this is not something that you're comfortable with, just winging it, here's a feather border. Love it. These are little feather loop-de-loos. Those would work. They even have things that are feathered Christmas trees. You know, most people don't realize that you could practice feathers on little pine trees or Christmas trees. So we'll put this one down below in just a little bit, and I'll show you how to do that one. So again, I'm just going to wing it. This is actually the way that I practice. I put things on like this to practice my freehand feathers. So I came to the end, now I'm going to go back. Tap a heart. And mine are not the same size, nor do I try to get them the same size. And when I get to the end, I need to decide how I'm going to stop. So I'm going to take that one and come right back down and then go the other way. So the other half of the heart. And then again, when I get to the top, I have to decide how am I going to end. So I'm going to pause at the top and stop. So that's a feather going from making the spine down the left side, or the top of the feather, and then back down the right side. Jay would like to know if I'm doing a locking stitch at the beginning and at the end of my design. So when I started the design and ended, I ended here and I started here. I did not do a locking stitch. I tend to hand tie it and then bury it. If you do a square knot, you can easily bury the square knot within what you're doing. So I'm going to pull the bobbin thread up. So I slide the machine away about 6 inches, slide it back to that same hole, do a needle up. There's my bobbin thread. And I cut those. And then I come back and I bury those. So I did not use a locking stitch to do this. When I use the Quilt Magician, I do use a locking stitch to do that. So let's place this feather down and see how much different this is than what we just did. I'm going to go back to the pounce. Take my blue painter's tape. Hold our stencil in place. If this was a real quilt, one that I was doing and needed to make sure everything lines up, I would make sure that all of my little registration marks gave me what I needed to line it up with the next line. So specifically on this feathered stencil, there are registration marks here. There are registration marks here. This is a corner to help you turn. So depending on what you're doing, you want to make sure how you line it up corresponds with what you're doing. So then come in and pounce. Pick it up. And there's our feathers. So I'm going to do the same thing that I just did now with this feather set. So again, I'm going to start at the spine. Give me just a moment and I'll move the camera so you can see. So I brought my bobbin thread up, my tails are in place. And the other thing is the pounce. And somebody just asked the question that I'm thinking. The pounce, there are different types. There are wash away, there's iron away, there is brush away. So you have to know exactly which pounce you are using and how does it come off the fabric. So I have a couple different ones, and I've actually marked my pounce containers so that I know exactly how the pounce is removed, because there's white, there's blue, there's pink. They're all different colors, and they're all different types of ways to remove it. So you want to make sure that you know how to remove it once you need to do that process. And so if you don't have, you know, that written on what you're doing, it makes it just a little harder. So I've moved the camera and I'm moving my handlebars so that I can try to keep my hands out of your way. The other thing is that I also do this a lot of times sitting down. I have a saddle seat and I sit down and I do a lot of my smaller quilting, my micro quilting, things like that. So once I get done here setting up, I go right into making my feathers. Again, a great way to make a sampler of the different techniques. that you can do to make feathers. So I pause. There's nothing wrong with pausing. I have it in Lizzie mode specifically so if I pause, it's not going to make a knot in what I'm doing. Pause, and there's my feathers. So keep in mind, don't be afraid to mark your quilts. Don't be afraid to try feathers because there's lots of ways to do feathers. Now we've got a few questions coming in, so while I move the camera, I'm going to take some of these questions. So Angela wondered about the pounce. So as I was saying, it comes off, you can brush away, wash away, heat away. So you can use an iron, water, or a brush. Either way. I tend to mark my quilt as I go. I do not tend to mark the whole quilt and then come back to it. You'll have the tendency of things not coming out or things not happening the way you want, or maybe you've changed your mind. I mean, how many times have you done a quilt and you go to do something and you say, oh, I wish I would have, and then change your mind. And there's nothing wrong with changing our mind. Shirley said that thinking the feathers as hearts is much easier. And I find it much easier. Again, you're going to find what works best for you. Now, I have some pretty wonky feathers up here. Keep in mind I'm going around a camera, but there's still practice. It does not matter. I'm not trying to make a perfect feather right now. I'm practicing. I'm making a sampler of feathers. I'm figuring out how can I make feathers that work for me. You know, when we go to this center one here, we're going to make a wreath. And some of you are going to go, oh, I don't know if I can do that. You don't know until you try. So you need to try. So I'm going to show you some little tips about making some feathers within that space. Angela says if you're doing a quilt with blocks similar to what you have stitched out, meaning the piece here, would you stitch in the ditch first or would you do the feathers first? You know, I've done it both ways, and for me, I don't see that one way is any better than doing it the other way. Usually, I put my design in the block and then I do the stitch in the ditch. But as I said, I've done it both ways, and for me, I did not see a difference in what I did. And that's what you really need to do, is do it both ways and see which way you like better. Is there something that you see differently? Now, Marie has a great question. What speed do you set the machine for? Well, the speed is my movement. So let me pull my bobbin thread up and move the machine over. I'm in stitch regulated mode. So what that means is that the speed that I'm moving has to do with me. So what I'm thinking, Marie, is that if you have a Tin Lizzie, you're putting it in manual mode. And manual is non-stitch regulated. So let's look at the screen of our Tin Lizzie. Let me get this up. Okay, this is our stitch regulated screen. We're not using the robot at the moment, although I have a robot set up, okay? But this is the stitch regulated screen. Lizzie mode is regulated. So the stitches that I have, let me just pull it a little closer, and I'll drop my needle down so it doesn't move on me. Okay, so the SPI is stitches per inch. So I can change that by going up or down. And remember, I said at the beginning I changed mine to 12. I like 12 to 14. I like small stitches. The speed is not activated right now. Okay, so in Lizzie mode we have our stitches. We have our Lizzie name here. we have needle up, down, and then we have our handlebar buttons. All right. Now, when I go to the next one, this is baste. Now, I did baste this piece of fabric on the frame this morning, and I stitched out the what's called the test, which I think of it as a placemat or a table runner or a sampler. I printed that out, or I've stitched that out, and I basted around everything. Baste is the size of the stitch, very large, okay, with stitches per inch. 3 is quite large. If I were to measure it, I would say that 3 is about a 2-inch stitch, which I really like. The next one that we go to is idle. Idle, if I were to turn the machine on right now, the needle will just keep pulsing. It'll just keep going up and down and up and down and up and down. That is, could be your locking stitch at the beginning or at the end. You would not want to use that for ruler mode unless you're going to push the stop button every time you do it. You really want to use the Lizzie mode. And then manual mode is speed. That is the speed of the needle. Manual is non-stitch regulated. Manual doesn't mean free motion necessarily, although you can free motion in manual mode. But that's not the mode that I was in. I was in the Lizzie mode. So those are all the modes on the specific machine that I'm on. You probably have similar modes or the same modes on your machines. So I'm ready to do the next feather area. And the next feather area is going to be the circle. And I'm only going to do feathers on the inside of the circle. And I'm going to use it as just an echo around of feathers on the inside of that circle. However, I could stitch out another circle or draw out another circle within that circle if we wanted to do feathers on the outside and feathers on the inside. Now, at my fingertips, I do not have a circle template, but I do have something that I found works very well when I do this size, and that is my tape. So if we chose to do a wreath with feathers on the inside and then the outside, and some of you are saying you'd like to see that, then I would draw this out, center it, offset it, do whatever, draw this out, and there's my hand-drawn center circle. I do have circle templates that also work quite well, but you want to find something that you can stitch out. Now, before we go to stitch this out, we want to make sure we have our machine set up correctly because we were playing inside of here. So right now, I'm on manual. Again, that's non-stitch regulated. This time, because this is going to be smaller, I'm going to make the stitches 14. So the 14 is a smaller stitch. This is going to be a small wreath, and it's going to be a smaller stitch. So the very first thing I'm going to do is bring up a longer tail from my needle and figure out where I'm going to start at. So there's my bobbin thread. Bring this back down here and needle down. Again, you need to decide what's going to work best for you, and if you want a spine or a shape for your spine, you could stitch that out now, or you could just do the inside and the outside feathers. I'm going to do a kind of wonky wreath, not necessarily a circle, but somewhere within that to show you that that just gave me a shape. But does that mean that I have to keep it a perfect circle? No. I tend to do better when I'm not perfect. And I'm not perfect. And I'm not going to try to be. And now, I'm going to go around this with my little feathers and big feathers. I'm going to pause here and move this tail out of my way and complete the circle. And then pause. Then we'll move that tail back this way, take the blue painter's tape, hold it down, and now I'm going to do the inside of the circle. And this time, I'm going to do little curls. As my fillers for the inside of the circle. So, because I did feathers, doesn't mean that I can't do something else on the other side. I'm going to again move this. I tend to just roll it up now that that center section is done. Hold it down with the tape, and now I can continue to do more things outside of this area. So I'm going to come back out here. I like little swirls with my feathers. And as I need to fill in where it's wider, because my feathers are smaller, it's a good way to do that. And then come back where I started and end. So now I have feathers, swirls, swirls, and feathers. And I could come back in this section and add those same little swirls in as I go also. Now Jay would like to know, is it easier to do the inside than it is to the outside? Which one's easier to do first? Again, for me it really doesn't matter. And if I was doing this without the camera right here beside me, I'd probably do it with my micro handles, because this is pretty small. So I have what are called micro maneuver tool or micro handles. You can get micro handles that go on here. There are different tools that can help you, and so I tend to work much closer to what I'm doing. I'm standing quite a bit farther out than what I normally would. Brenda would like to know if I always use the blue painter's tape, and the answer is I use whichever painter's tape I have. In my drawer here I have blue, green, and purple. So it really doesn't matter which one you use as long as it works. Some are more tactile than others. So it's really up to you which one you find that you like. So once you complete this, then maybe you go out to here, or maybe you go in here. Now, there are other types of things you can do with that same process that you learned with the feathers. And that is, for me, I visually sometimes see the peacock eye being very similar to the feathers. So let me show you what that is. I'm going to pull my bobbin thread up, move this stuff out of our way. Clip my long tails. And just hold those in place. So I'm going to come over to this one here. And what you have in a peacock eye is quite similar to what we've been doing. And so what I tend to do is I'll pick a spot where I'm going to start the peacock eye. And again, you might not see the peacock eye as a feather, or you might say, ooh, I see it, okay? So a peacock eye is almost the same shape as the heart, and then it's echoed a few times, and then echoed a few times. So the heart echoed out. So that shape, and I'll draw it out here for you, that shape is a nice shape that allows you to make something similar that would really complement your feathers. And we do have a webinar coming up called Feathers and Fillers, and that's one where we'll show you more. But peacock eyes like that, and then you might come out this way, then out this way. So the shape is this. The shape of a feather could be a paisley, or it could be a heart. So depending on how you visually see things, do you see it as a paisley? Do you see it as a heart? What do you see it as? Now the last few minutes here, I'm actually going to go into the Art and Stitch program just to show you some hearts, and these are made by some well-known quilters. So Judy Allen, this heart specifically is one of her designs, but I thought that if I could show you how these stitched, that would help you to know how to do the design itself. So I'm going to run through the process here. Oh, one more thing I need to do. And let you see how it stitches, because sometimes just watching how something moves gives us a better understanding of how to do it. When I first started digitizing, I'd sit and watch my embroidery machine stitch, and that would help me to understand how to digitize something. The same thing happens here. I watch this travel through here, and I can see how it stitches. So on this specific one, they went from the inside to the outside and no spine. Okay, let's go new and pull up another one for you. Here's a border. It's only half, meaning that only half of it is feathered. So the spine and then the feathers. Do you see the heart? Another heart? Paisley? Whatever you see the teardrop, kind of like our peacock eyes. And then back down the spine to the middle. Two more. I just think that this is a great way. Love this feathered heart. Now, if you're recording this with the Quilt Magician, keep in mind you only have to record half of this heart if you were making something that you were doing, because you could mirror it and put it back together again right on the robotics. So think about how these stitch. Might not be the way that you would do it, and it might be. Maybe you do the entire outside and then go inside. Maybe you do the inside and go outside. Either way. See, for me, doing this without the spine first is difficult. I would rather place my spine down and bring everything to it. And then the last one, pretty artsy feathers. This is a continuous line. This is something that could go together. So let me stitch this one out to show you, and there is one more after this one. So Jay is asking, do I turn off the locking stitch on the robot so I can bury them? I have one lock stitch on the robotics instead of 3 or 4 or 5. See how those are more whimsical, more free? But not incorrect, because remember, there's no rules. So when it comes to feathers, what I want to say is try them, practice them. Practice them over and over again. I never thought I could stitch a feather ever. And I like my feathers. I like what I do with my feathers. I like how they look. I like the style of my feathers. And you're going to find, again, what works best for you. So keep in mind, practice, practice, practice. This wreath I absolutely love. So if you look at this, you have hearts. There's those little swirls that I did on my circle with feathers around them. Again, if you were recording this, you would only record 1/4 of it, which is 1 repeat. And truly, when you get good, or if you had software, you'd only have to record 1/8 of it and mirror it together. So let's see how this one stitches, because I think you'll be amazed at how this one stitches. Angela says that she's getting ready to do her first quilt with feathers, and that this helped her to have a good vision and take a little of the fear out and practice. Again, stitch out your blocks or stitch out some shapes, and practice with your shapes. And a lot of times when I'm at shows or just doodling, I doodle with feathers, and I go back and forth and do different things with my feathers. So feathers are lots of fun. No rules. Don't forget, you can do feathers with flames. You can do all kinds of things with feathers and have fun with them. Don't be afraid to try them, because they're not quite as hard as what you might have thought they were.